even if it is quite severe. And if you're more concerned about the severity, then get better at things like testing where you can validate somebody's infectious. But in any case, I think you need to, there's this tendency of people with statist views to take different kinds of threats and then argue that this threat justifies a vast expansion of my power. And part of what they do is they ignore all the downsides of them getting that power. And in the case of COVID, a big part of it was, so people have mentioned, well, you don't think about what are all the negative consequences of locking people down. And I think one thing that led to this that also applies with fossil fuels is there's always this question of what is the goal that your policy is pursuing? Because that's going to determine the standard by which you evaluate, hey, this policy is good, this policy is bad. And with COVID, the goal that wasn't stated explicitly very often, but was operating, was essentially eliminate this virus at all costs. That was really the goal of COVID policy, and that is a totally unjustifiable goal. Like, nobody could actually argue this one virus should be eliminated at all costs, but it functions that way until you identify explicitly, hey, this is the goal we're pursuing, and it makes no sense. And it's a similar thing with energy, where our goal in energy right now is eliminate CO2 emissions at all costs. That is not a justifiable goal, and when you make it explicit, it becomes pretty clear, yeah, that doesn't make any sense as a goal. Maybe it's an aspect of advancing human flourishing, but it can't be, we're going to get rid of this at all costs, otherwise we would literally just kill all of ourselves right now.
Well, I think part 3 is also remarkable, and that's really where you lay out the case for why CO2 emissions are not all that they're claimed to be, and that they might actually be beneficial in a lot of ways.
Yeah, in a sense, I think part 3 is kind of the most controversial, but also inarguable part of the book. Like, I haven't seen anyone, so, because just to get the structure of it, part 1 is called Framework, and it's really about how what I call our knowledge system is evaluating this issue of what to do about fossil fuels based on ultimately an anti-human framework, which I call the anti-impact framework, which says that ultimately says that human impact on nature is intrinsically immoral, so we shouldn't do it, so our goal should be to eliminate it, and then it's inevitably self-destructive, and it's based on this idea of, oh, the planet is this delicate nurturer, and if we impact it, it's all going to punish us, this kind of thing. And so my point is, our experts, or who we're being told are experts, are evaluating this issue using totally the wrong framework, and this leads them to ignore the benefits of fossil fuels to human flourishing and to what I call catastrophize the side effects, because they think every impact we have is going to lead nature to punish us like a vengeful god. That's their perspective. And then it's, okay, let's look at it with the human flourishing framework, thinking about our goal is to advance human flourishing on Earth, and our premise is the Earth is not this delicate nurture, it's a wild potential that we need to impact a lot, as long as we do it intelligently. And then part 2 is all about, okay, let's look at the benefits, and it's arguing that the benefits of cost-effective energy are incomparably greater than we're taught, and that fossil fuels are uniquely capable of providing that for the billions of people who have it and the billions of people who need it. And so it's essentially saying the livability of Earth depends on fossil fuel use. And why I say that's, I don't think it's really refutable, but somebody can say like, oh, well, I discovered a new technology and we can replace fossil fuels, etc. I don't think it's plausible, but interestingly, a lot of the climate catastrophists are taking that tack. They're not actually attacking me much on climate and climate mastery. They're attacking me on, oh, like renewables are so amazing and you just don't see them. Like this guy, Andrew Dessler, who's on he's now become world's energy expert, apparently. Like his attack on me is almost all based on renewables are so amazing, which I think particularly now is quite a thing to say, given that we've tried to replace fossil fuels with renewables and we've restricted fossil fuels and now we have these shortages, and Biden is not going to China for solar panels, he's going to Saudi Arabia for oil. So to get to part 3 though, part 3 is really saying that fossil fuels not only are not causing climate catastrophe, but they're actually driving a climate renaissance. That is, we're far safer from climate than ever thanks to fossil fuels. And that the evidence we have about the future climate impacts of fossil fuels, there's nothing in that range that is catastrophic, let alone apocalyptic, if you factor in our masteryability. And the thing is, really, once you factor in the masteryability, it's really hard to be scared about these different kinds of climate impacts. And my claim about the establishment is they're not only ignoring the broad benefits of fossil fuels, they're particularly ignoring the climate mastery benefits. And then the other thing is, because their implicit goal is let's eliminate human impact because it's evil, they think of our impact on climate as just intrinsically immoral and we shouldn't do it, and they expect us to be punished for it. So it has a religious quality to it, where it's like the commandment is thou shalt not impact the climate, and then the climate is going to punish us vengefully if we impact it. And you really see so much of the climate discussion is just this belief it's wrong for us to impact the climate and we're sinners and we shouldn't do it, versus let's look clinically at what these impacts are, positive and negative and neutral, and then what are the benefits that come with them. When you do that in that clinical, pro-human, kind of non-dogmatic way, it's like you have a totally different view of the whole situation.
Well, I think, Alex, going along with that is a point you make a few places in the book that, you
he gets skeptical of a lot of these alarmists that they really are just concerned about human welfare, because if it really were the case that CO2 emissions, we need to really get those down to net zero by 2050, if not sooner, and all these things are also huge impacts on humanity. If that were really the issue, then they would be the hugest boosters of nuclear and hydro for sure. Like you talk about renewable, and yet, as you point out, I think James Hansen is, if I'm not getting mixed up, is the only major advocate who actually is pro-nuclear at this point.
Yes.
And so it makes you wonder about the sincerity or what the actual motivation is. If, amongst clearly nuclear and hydro should be embraced with open arms. If the point is, we have all this political resistance, people don't like expensive energy, so okay, let's embrace these things that are not CO2 emitting, yet they're against those as well.
For sure, and I think it uses sincerity and motivation. I think both of those are very much in question. And this is part of what I point out in chapter 1 is part of the reason to be very suspicious of our knowledge system is that, again, it's hostile to fossil fuels. It's also hostile to nuclear, it's hostile to hydro, and it's hostile to all the activities involved in solar and wind, including mining. So solar and wind involve unprecedented amounts of mining and unprecedented amounts of industrial development. And that's part of why they get resisted all over the place. And so you have what you see is that our knowledge system, what I call designated experts, they are hostile to all forms of energy. Whereas, to your point, if you valued energy at all, let alone as much as I value it, as much as it should be valued, if you thought you needed to rapidly reduce fossil fuel use, you would be really somber about that, and you'd be really scared about the negatives of it. And yeah, you would just be overwhelmingly pro-nuclear, pro-hydro, pro-anything we can do. You'd be just as worked up about the threat of less energy as you are about climate catastrophe. Now, in reality, you should be infinitely more worked up about the threat of less energy. But even if you have the AOC type position of, these climate impacts are going to be so terrible, you have to recognize the impacts of less energy. Like, that is catastrophic. And fortunately, fortunately, intellectually, not existentially, we have an energy crisis right now that's really illustrating that. Because I've been saying for years, including in that thing when Barbara Boxer said, I don't appreciate being lectured by a philosopher, and I was telling her you need to look at the benefits of fossil fuels. Well, I told her and the rest of that group, energy is the industry that powers every other industry. The price of energy determines the price of everything, and we're seeing that right now with price inflation being substantially driven by energy prices. And it's just, this is like everything I say in fossil future is coming true now in terms of if you ignore the benefits of fossil fuels and more broadly the importance of cost-effective energy, you are going to hurt so many people, including their ability to eat.
Alex, if we consider nuclear the cleaner alternative to coal for electricity, and clearly it is, I worry after Fukushima, the political and regulatory environment. There's one new reactor has been built in Georgia. It's not online yet.
It's not
I know. Look at what Germany's doing. I really, really fear that nuclear may be, at least temporarily, somewhat dead in the water.
I think it's important to recognize that absent substantial changes in the approach to nuclear, it is dead in the water. Because what you see, so I think of myself as broadly part of this, and probably one of the leaders of what I call the energy humanist movement. So people are looking at energy issues in humanistic terms and looking at the fossil fuels, the benefits and the side effects carefully. And I think one kind of error that makes some people disappointed for nuclear is they can act like nuclear is more of a near-term replacement than it is. What you're talking about is very important. We have a nuclear regulatory commission since it was created. We don't have one reactor that has gone from conception to completion under the NRC. We have these, in Georgia, we have a situation where we have these unbelievable cross-border routes where it's totally uneconomic. 2012, he was being interviewed, and he said, "What they're doing in Germany is un-effing believable. They're getting 50% of their energy from solar." And it's like, okay, that's definitely what happened. And he's talking in December, and it's like, okay, so the first error was what he had done is he had taken like a daily high in June, and then he had taken that so it was a daily high of electricity, one coming from solar. So one is it's a daily high, right? It's not the average throughout the day. It's just like a peak during the day. And then he's only taking electricity, not energy, even though most of our energy use in those places is not from electricity, it's from things like transportation, and also burning fossil fuels directly for very high amounts of heat, and sometimes for very clean residential natural gas. This is part of the reason Germany is super dependent on Russia, because they use natural gas for so many things, including to accommodate the reliability of solar. And that was just funny that he was taking the statistic from June and he just assumed that it was still true in December. Like, even though one of the problems with solar wind is they're very bad season, right? So solar is not anywhere near as good in December. And I'm just thinking, like, this is the guy who's telling us what to do about energy, right? He doesn't know the difference between electricity and energy, who takes daytime highs and equates them with averages, and who equates solar in December with solar in June. And yeah, so it's so important to be precise about these things, and the fact that so many of our leading thinkers are not really should solidify the idea that our whole establishment just doesn't value, at minimum, doesn't value energy, and there's a lot of reasons to think it's hostile to energy. And to make that final connection, I make the point in chapter 3, where I can analyze what's going on with our experts and our knowledge system is, ultimately, if you think human impact on nature is a bad thing that should be eliminated, you hate the benefits of energy. You need to hate the benefits of energy. It's not just you hate, oh, there's pollution or there's CO2 and you think that's problematic. It's the very purpose of energy is to do work on the rest of nature. Like, that's what it is, the capacity to do work. So the more energy we use, the more we are going to transform nature to suit our purposes. And transform just means impact. So if you're against impact, you're against transformation, and you're against energy. This is why you see with the most consistent of our designated experts, they'll just say we're using too much energy. And just like they'll say we have too many people. And it's really just a deep opposition to humanity.
Yes, that's a philosophical problem. As to your point here, I have an atlas downstairs. I'm gonna go check. I'm pretty sure Germany is not on the equator.
Yeah,
Last time I checked. I mean, let's talk briefly about the third world, what we might call the developing world, and what you suggest we call the unempowered world, where there's something like 3 billion people every day basically don't consume energy. Aren't we being neo-colonialist in the West if we sort of try to thrust our anti-fossil fuel mentality on these countries who would actually like to have a chance to have their own condo or car or air conditioning or whatever it might be in Africa or India or China?
I mean, definitely you're being, it's unjust, and I think this has been one of my arguments that I've made in the whole case for fossil fuels and now fossil future that has been most resonant, and that the other side is most terrified of, because in part it undercuts their claimed humanitarianism. Like, if you look even when they talk about climate, they'll say, oh, I'm so concerned about climate because there will be worse storms in like Indonesia, and I really care about those people. And if you read Fossil Future, if you care about people, they need energy, they need productive ability, that'll enable them to deal with storms and to actually eat and protect themselves from nature in general, and have medical care and have education. You need energy for all of these things, but you can see that they're making that appeal. They're claiming to care about the welfare of poor people because that's an issue that's resonant with people for many, I would say, valid reasons. Sometimes they make appeals that I don't agree with, but for valid reasons, and certainly it is unjust to deprive people of opportunity who are already in a low opportunity situation. And it's really hard to argue against the point you just made and that I make. And so I don't know if you heard about this saga, but the Washington Post, about maybe a month and a half before my book came out, tried to do this cancel campaign on me, where they tried to characterize me as a racist. And specifically the goal of it was to say that, hey, this guy is a racist, so he doesn't really care about these poor people in these countries. He's just claiming to care, and so you don't need to listen to his arguments. Okay, so we can talk about this. The argument of racist was insane, and I was able to totally preempt the story, refute it, and they didn't end up, they watered down the article, they didn't use the word racist, so that's part of it, but clearly they are threatened by this argument that their policies are most harmful to the lowest opportunity people in the world, and that's why they wanted this ad hominem, because they have no answer to that argument.
Again, I think all this stuff goes together with the, what we talked about earlier in the discussion, that I think they're hiding their true, and again, we shouldn't brush broad strokes, say they, and they're like, in terms of the loudest activists and the ones, as you say, the ones that are in the microphone political debate, where they're listing what they say the motivations are, but when you peel it back, you see that actual motivations are something else entirely. And as you say, sometimes it comes out where they say things like, yeah, we're just using too much energy. And I think for a lot of these people, they don't like capitalism. They think humans, their standard of living is too high, so they actually implicitly agree with you. Like, yeah, more energy use means higher standard of living. We're against higher standard of living, therefore that's why we want to reduce. They're actually being consistent sell this to the public using a different framework.
Definitely, and you mentioned painting with a broad brush, and it's important not to do that, but I do try to explain in chapter 3 that I think most of us have adopted to a significant degree what I call the anti-impact framework, and one way it comes up is that when we're thinking about the world, we're often doing a contradictory thing, which is kind of optimizing for eliminating human impact and optimizing for advancing human flourishing. And so one place this comes up is with climate. Most people's goal with respect to climate that they're operating on is how do we minimize or eliminate our impact on climate. When we discuss climate, that is the goal, right? They'll talk about stop climate change. Well, what does that mean? That means stop human climate impact. But from a human flourishing perspective, that's a crazy goal. Your goal should be to, advance climate livability. And as I mentioned before, priority number 1 should be to increase your mastery of climate, because that allows you to neutralize negatives and in fact turn negatives into positives. And yet most people who are pro-human, they're pro-human if you push them on it and if their values are clarified explicitly, but in the normal way of thinking, they're thinking about the issue in an anti-human way. So one thing I'm challenging readers to do is think about what is your own operating framework with this issue, and are you thinking about this issue in a consistently pro-human way? And I'll just say, one of my discoveries in writing this book was even I, who was quite aware of these issues, wasn't fully doing it. And for example, with the climate issue, I was too much assuming that man-made warming was bad, instead of really being clinical about it and saying, well, where is it bad for humans and where is it good for humans? And there are a number of places which is clearly good for humans, and I was just realizing, I was still thinking of it somewhat in this, if we created it, it must be bad, versus not having any bias one way or another, just saying, is the result good for us or is it not good for us? In the particular of the warming, and then of course in the broader picture, the warming plus the energy difference.
Well, folks, we could talk about this book for 4 hours. We could talk about it longer than it takes to read it, but nonetheless, absolutely.
Which is a long time.
It's a book I highly recommend. You can find it on Amazon, Fossil Future. You can follow Alex Epstein. He's got his own website, EPSTEIN, AlexEpstein.com. And most importantly, you can follow him on Twitter at the same handle, at Alex Epstein. And keep up with what he's doing. Defend him, promote him, get this book out there, buy it. Folks, this is important stuff. This is civilizational. And there are a lot of people out there who are anti-prosperity. They don't understand trade-offs. They don't understand the world we live in. And they simply don't share our goals for greater prosperity for people. And they're hostile to capitalism. So I think all of us have an individual burden to bear. And Alex has certainly done that. He put a ton of work, a ton of his life's energy into doing this. And he's been out there with a target on his back. He's been at the front of the barricades on our behalf. So if you agree with this, please buy the book, spread information about Alex, and keep up with him, because this is on all of us. We have to stop these people who want to curtail our future and that of our kids and grandkids. So Alex, I want to thank you so much for writing the book and for joining us.
Thanks. Just one quick comment, if I can make it, is two ways you can really help a lot. Of course, you can get the book, which you can get easily at fossilfuture.com and see about discounts and stuff there. But one thing is just, if so much of the world is changed by influential people, which is part of why I wanted you guys to read the book before we talk, because I want influential people to read these arguments, because I know that some percentage of them will really agree with them and spread them. And so I would just say, if you know of influential shows or influential people who would like a copy of the book, I'm very eager to